Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're grabbing our magnifying glasses and putting on our detective hats because we're about to dive into a legal puzzle from the Talmud that's centuries old. Our mission? To crack this case wide open and, in the process, uncover a really unique and powerful way of thinking.
So here's the question at the heart of it all. In those ancient temple rituals, who actually had to do the work? Was it strictly for priests, or could just about anyone step in? Now, on the surface, that seems pretty simple, right? Priests do priest stuff. But, not so fast. The answer is way more complex than you'd think, and it opens up this incredible intellectual world where every single word is a clue.
And this is where our investigation really kicks off. At the center of this whole thing is a flat-out contradiction. You've got two totally authoritative sources, and they say the exact opposite thing. Now, this isn't some ancient typo. It's a deliberate intellectual challenge, a puzzle just waiting for us to solve.
Okay, so let's start with our first piece of evidence. It's a ruling from this really foundational legal text called the Mishnah. You can basically think of it as the core book of statutes for this whole legal system. It's the baseline.
And here it is. This is our central mystery. On the left, the Mishnah says, crystal clear, a non-priest can pour the oil for a grain offering and it's totally fine. But then, on the right, you have the great sage Rabbi Shimon, and he says, pouring oil is a priestly rite. So, which one is it? Can a non-priest do it or not? They can't both be right. Or can they?
So to really get to the bottom of this, let's use the original terms, because it'll help. A Kohen is a priest. A Zar is a non-priest. So the Mishnah says a Zar is okay to pour the oil. But Rabbi Shimon implies only a Kohen can. How is that possible? Well, the ancient commentators put on their own detective hats to figure it out.
Our first detective on the scene is a scholar named Rav Nachman. He looks at these two conflicting statements, and he tries a classic move to resolve a contradiction. He suggests, hey, maybe they aren't actually talking about the same thing. So Rav Nachman comes up with two theories. This is a really key technique in this kind of thinking. It's called harmonization. First, he says, maybe the Mishnah is talking about a regular person's offering, while Rabbi Shimon is talking about a special offering that a priest brings. Or, theory two, maybe it's about different procedures. One offering has a handful burned, the other is burned whole. See what he's doing? In either case, the conflict just vanishes. Problem solved. But just when we think the case is closed, another scholar, Rava, steps in with this razor-sharp rebuttal. He points out a fatal flaw. He says, wait a minute. The rules for a priest's offering are legally based on the rules for a regular offering. You can't just separate them. If a non-priest is okay in one, they have to be okay in the other. And just like that, Rav Nachman's whole theory falls apart.
So Rava forces us to face a tougher reality. There is no easy fix here. The contradiction is real. The Mishnah and Rabbi Shimon are on opposite sides of the issue, and they fundamentally disagree. Period.
Now, this is where the investigation gets really fascinating. We're not trying to make the problem disappear anymore. Instead, we're asking a much, much deeper question. It's not about who's right or who's wrong, it's about why. Why do they believe what they believe? What is the core legal principle, the fundamental logic, that leads them to completely opposite conclusions?
And what's absolutely wild is that both sides, they build their entire opposing arguments on the exact same verse from the book of Leviticus. Talk about a smoking gun. Let's look at the evidence.
Okay, so the verse describes a few actions in order. You pour oil, then you bring the offering, and then a priest takes a handful to burn. Now, that phrase right in the middle, Aaron's sons, the priests, that's everything. The whole debate hinges on a single grammatical question. What parts of the sentence does that phrase apply to?
So, the rabbis, the ones behind the Mishnah, they argue for a really simple linear reading. They say the phrase Aaron's sons, the priests, introduces a new requirement. So logically, it only applies to the actions that come after it's mentioned, like removing the handful. That first action, pouring oil, which happens before the priests are even mentioned, that's not included. So a non-priest can do it. Makes sense. But Rabbi Shimon reads it completely differently. He argues that when a key phrase like that is plopped in the middle of a process, it radiates outwards. It applies to the whole context, what comes after and what came before. So for him, both taking the handful and pouring the oil have to be done by a priest. Aha! It looks like we found our core principle. But come on, this is a Talmudic detective story. You know there's going to be another twist. Is this read it backwards rule really Rabbi Shimon's consistent logic? To find out, the text calls a surprise witness to the stand, another ruling from Rabbi Shimon himself, and it threatens to blow our whole theory to bits.
Get this. In a totally different discussion, this one about applying blood to the altar, Rabbi Shimon explicitly argues against reading a key phrase backwards. He insists it should only be read forwards. Whoa, this is a huge problem. His own logic seems to completely contradict the reasoning we just gave him. Our neat little theory is in serious doubt.
Okay, so it's back to the drawing board. The scholars come up with a brand new theory. They say, okay, maybe it's not about reading backwards. Maybe it's all about one single powerful little word, and. The verse says, pour oil, and he shall bring it. That and, they argue, grammatically links the first action, pouring the oil, to the subject of the next clause, which is the priests. Now that is a brilliant grammatical solution.
But you know, a good detective has to test every theory. You have to stress test it. If this powerful and rule is true, it's got to work everywhere. So the text immediately puts it to the ultimate litmus test, bringing up another, even more common ritual, the slaughter of an animal for an offering.
So here's the new dilemma. The verse for slaughtering an animal has the exact same structure. Slaughter the bull, and the priest shall offer the blood. You see the problem? If Rabbi Shimon's and rule is consistent, then slaughter also has to be done by a priest. But everybody knows that's not true. A regular person, a non-priest, can absolutely slaughter an animal for an offering. Our new theory seems to be broken already.
But just when you think it's over, the text finds this brilliant way out. It pulls up another verse that explicitly links the act of slaughter to the act of placing hands on the animal's head. And who does that? The owner, who's a non-priest. This creates a specific scriptural exception just for slaughter, legally separating it from all the priestly duties that come after. It's a perfect loophole.
And this brings us to the final beautiful piece of the puzzle. It's a powerful kind of logic called an a fortiori argument, basically a how much more so kind of reasoning. And it goes like this. Look, the most critical part of this whole ritual, the thing that actually brings atonement, is sprinkling the blood. And that can only be done by a priest, not the owner. So, if the owner isn't needed for the most essential part, well then it's a no-brainer that they aren't needed for a less essential step like slaughter. And boom, the system is perfectly consistent once you see how all the rules fit together.
So, after all those twists and turns, what have we found? We've seen that the rabbi's view, based on a simple linear reading, is perfectly logical. And we've seen that Rabbi Shimon's view, built on grammatical connections and special exceptions, is also deeply internally consistent. The point was never to just declare a winner. It was to walk the path, to appreciate the intense, rigorous intellectual work that goes into building and defending each position from the ground up.
And that's really what this ancient detective story leaves us with. It suggests that maybe the goal wasn't just to get a simple answer about who pours the oil. Maybe the real value is in learning how to think, how to follow the evidence, test theories, find contradictions, and appreciate the complex, beautiful process of asking the right questions. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other simple questions in our own world have these incredibly complex and beautiful answers just waiting to be discovered?